Welcome to the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast. On this channel, we're going to be discussing all things marrying a farmer, moving to the land, and becoming integrated with a family farming operation. Whether you're moving to the farm for the first time or whether you're moving back into a family farming operation, we discuss the ins and the outs of all of it. So let's jump into today's episode.
Hello to listeners of The Ultimate Farm Wife. This is Arlene here from Canada, and this is not the voice that you're used to hearing, but we are helping catch you out this week. And I am going to be interviewing my friend and co-host of the podcast that we host together, which is called Barnyard Language. And it is a parenting and agriculture podcast. So I am in Canada, Caite is in the US, and we're coming to you in Australia. So this feels like a pretty cool way to connect. And we know from having done our show for 4 and now into 5 seasons that farm parents around the world have more in common than we have different. Well, we have a lot of differences, but we have a lot of things in common too. So I guess we're not going to keep a record of if we have more things in common or more things that are different, but we do have a lot of similarities. So we were lucky enough to have Katja on our show and have since become friends through the internet, and maybe someday in real life we'll get to actually meet each other. So today I am going to be interviewing Caite. I've already been lucky enough to be on The Ultimate Farm Wife myself, and now it's Caite's turn. So Caite, we are going to start with your introduction. So introduce yourself, your farm, your family. Tell us a little bit about where you're located and what your farm looks like.
My name is Caite Palmer. I am 44 for anyone who is not, I guess, listening to our show, and it doesn't really matter, but I am a slightly older mother. I have a daughter who is 8 and a son who is 7. My husband and I run about 300 acres in far northeastern Iowa, which is less flat than most of the Midwest, but still pretty Midwestern.
For those of you in Australia, Midwest is the middle section of the USA. It's not really that far west in the grand scheme of things, but it's in the middle. It's one of the states that has straight lines and starts with a vowel, like a whole bunch of the others in the same area.
Yeah, that's pretty true. Arlene majored in geography, for anyone who can't tell, so she's real good at this, knowing where things are. I, on the other hand, have an American public school education, which apparently didn't include geography at all. So I do know where Australia is, though, so that's for something. I just totally lost my train of thought with that straight lines.
Oh, what do you raise on your farm?
Thank you, Arlene. We raise Normandy cattle for beef. We have 18 cows, and we raise calf to finish. So we have 18 mama cows and stockers and bigger stockers. And as of 2 days ago, fall calving has started. So it's the second week of September. So we've got one little teeny tiny duder on the ground, and he is real effing cute. I love fall calving because the babies are real cute. We also raise Katahdin sheep for meat. So we have about, I think I counted 38 ewes. They are hair sheep, so while their wool falls out, the American wool market is even worse than wool markets in the rest of the world, I think. So we also raise a few chickens. We have some feral ducks. I have no idea how many there are. Not enough that they've launched a rebellion. So not too many, but we farm with my husband's parents. They live right across the road, which is not nearly as bad in practice as it was in theory before we got married. They're delightful people.
And what are you doing crop-wise with the acres that you were telling us about?
Corn, beans, oats, hay rotation. About a third of it is timber, and about a third of it is in conservation reserve, which around here means a pollinator prairie mix, which means that we have a lot of birds and a lot of wildlife.
And from what I understand, you get paid not to cultivate that land, right?
Yes, it's a strange thing where most years you get paid more to not farm than you would to farm it. There are some confusing things about how those payments work. It's basically rented out to the federal government on a 10-year contract. But it's nice because a lot of folks in our area do it because a lot of our ground is not really crop suited. And so we have more wild looking spaces, and our cattle and our sheep are all on pasture. So most of the grain we're raising is for feed or to pay bills, honestly.
And outside the farm, you and your husband are also employed. The farm is not the main source of your income. Is that correct?
No, the farm is, like also many Americans, not our primary source of income. I haven't looked at the financials recently, but it is probably a negative cash flow situation, I would, as usual. My husband works for a local feed dealer, feed and seed and waters and gates and things of that nature. I was laid off this spring from a large tech company, so I am job seeking, which is more stressful and honestly more work than actually working.
Yeah, that is true. And you were 100% remote with some travel thrown in that job. So, yeah, that's the trick of living in a rural place and seeking jobs. There's not a lot of opportunity locally, but finding something that's 100% remote is tricky too.
Yeah. And also because, yay, America, we have no health insurance currently because that was provided through my employer. My husband's employer is too small to provide insurance. So, yeah, it's without getting into the politics of the universe right now, I assume that because America is clearly, and I mean this sarcastically, the center of the entire universe, I assume that most Australians have some idea of what's going on in our country. It's not great, but it's not nearly as bad as a lot of other places, which is what we keep telling ourselves.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave politics aside because I'm sure there's a lot to say from a lot of different places. So, going back to having in laws as neighbors, Katja has provided me with a bunch of questions, and some of them are things that I have never asked you before or never heard of in all of our conversations that we've had over 4 seasons. So, I'm really going to enjoy this process of asking you questions that Katja thought up for me.
Oh, exciting. I was wondering what you were going to actually ask me about that you would not already just be able to say.
For this episode, I didn't have to do any research, which is fantastic. So, Katie, what was your first impression of the farm once you met the farmer? And do you want to tell people also how you met the farmer?
So I had decided I was probably never getting married. I was never going to have kids. I was in a really, really bad place in my life. And I was driving home from my shitty job in a commercial greenhouse, just thinking about what a hot mess my life was.
As many romance novels start.
Yes, basically, it, it really is gross. I had signed up many years ago for a dating website called farmersonly.com. Someday they're going to start paying me for this advertisement. And I was driving home from work. I'm not a religious person, but I had this like, oh, moment from the universe that was like, you should go on there. And I hadn't been on there in years because it's, 95% men. Most of them are people I already know. There's a good reason they're on dating websites instead of like out meeting women in more normal ways.
Or they live too far away and you weren't going to actually actively go and meet someone in another state. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's also the problem with dating farmers is that if they live far away, nobody's going to relocate. So, you're kind of up a creek there. Anyway, went on, saw this guy's profile, messaged him something stupid about tractors. Who knows? My now husband went on that same night after having dinner with his parents to tell them that he was literally came from dinner where he had told them he was never getting married, he was never having kids, they were just going to have to deal with it, he was going to be a bachelor farmer forever. They flew to Wales that Sunday to help my sister-in-law whose husband was very ill. My husband at that point had never brought a girl home, had never introduced a woman to his parents, none of that. He was 34, I want to say. Anyway, that was a Thursday night. We went on our first date on Easter Sunday of 2012. He brought me to the farm that night, actually. Showed me his hayloft. That pretty much, he likes to say that it took him longer to know we were going to get married because it took him till our second date.
He literally showed you his hayloft. That's not a euphemism for something else.
He literally showed me his hayloft. Yeah. I can't imagine why he had not been snapped up long ago with that level of romantic game, but clearly it worked for me. We went on our first date on Sunday. I knew we'd be married. I knew by the end of that date that we'd be married. I took my dog with me because I figured if my dog didn't like him, there was no way in hell. And I flat out told him that if my dog hadn't liked him at first sight, there wouldn't be a date at all. We went on a date every night that week. I moved in, I think, slightly less than 3 weeks later, and by the time his folks got back from Wales in July, we were already engaged. So his parents actually got married faster than we did. So they were pretty chill about it. And no, I was not pregnant.
So you hadn't even met the in-laws that you have now been neighbors with ever since.
I met them once on a Zoom call.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. They had done a lot of work previously with having boundaries with my now husband and, not being too far into his business since he also, lived on the same property as them. He's lived on the same farm his whole life. And they have lived here his whole life as well. So it's really, there's still occasions where it's a little like, wow, my in laws can see my house from their house. This is great. But 99% of the time, it really is nice. And, it's very good for my kids. It's good for my family. As my in laws are getting older, it's nice to know that it won't be as inconvenient to help them with more stuff since they do live across the road instead of having to, drive somewhere to see them.
So since you were on the farm on your first date, this is an easier question to answer. What was your first impression of the farm? Obviously, the hayloft was impressive.
It is a century farm, and our barn is still one of the biggest in the county. It was certainly one of the biggest in the county in 1921 when it was built. It's a nice small farm. It's what people picture when they picture a Midwest American farm, Big farmhouse, apple trees, barn, cows, big wooden barn.
Yeah, wooden barn.
Yep. My husband and his dad collect Dallas Chalmers tractors, so there are tractors, as Arlene can attest from visiting, everywhere.
The barn has more tractors than livestock, let's just say that.
Yes, yes.
So things moved fairly quickly, obviously, in your relationship. What was the biggest adjustment when moving to and marrying into a farming family? Were you from a farm background yourself?
I grew up on a hobby farm. I would say the biggest adjustment, honestly, was my husband. I think maybe it had like a goldfish or like a gerbil or something, but was not a house pets guy.
Right. He was an animals outside guy and no animals inside. Yeah.
Yes, no. Animals inside,
And that's not even a farm thing necessarily. Sometimes that's just a family culture thing, right?
I moved in with one dog and one cat. And in our house currently, we have 2 adult humans, 2 small humans, a Labrador Red Heeler cross, an Australian Shepherd, 5 cats, only 2 of which are mine, 3 guinea pigs, a hedgehog. If I leave the door open too long, there's usually some chickens in here. We end up with lambs in here every lambing season. I don't think we've had any calves in here, but, never say never. So I think that's been the biggest adjustment for my husband, was just the idea of having animals in the house. But it was such a non-negotiable when we met that he's never even tried to stop it.
Sure. What was the biggest adjustment for you?
That's a really good question. Having someone in my space all the time. I think, even living with roommates, like, I'm an only child. I grew up with a single parent. I'm used to setting things down and them still being where I left them. Especially with children, things are never where I left them. And even, this is a really good question.
Yeah, that's true.
Not being able to travel alone, or it being, unexpected that I would travel somewhere by myself. Just the This sounds bad to be like having to think about other people. What? But, not just cooking what I want for dinner, not just doing what I wanted to do. And the laundry. The laundry.
Yeah, it does take some adjustment, right? Yeah, getting used to other people's expectations, or even just, yeah, considering other people's thoughts when you're used to being single for a long time.
Yeah. And then, of course, adding in farming with family, you get that many more opinions. And when you live in a small town and you marry into a family who's been on the same farm for quite a while, our kids are the fifth generation in this house, you get opinions from that many more people. And hopefully, eventually, you learn to ignore a lot of them and you learn whose opinions actually matter in your existence, which at this point is pretty much the people who live on this farm and nobody else.
Yeah, that's true.
Where heritage and legacy intersects with the fashion world. Homestead Road is founded by fifth-generation wool producer Bridget Brooks, built on the values of versatility, quality, durability, and sustainability. Homestead Road's mission is to educate, connect, and celebrate rural women by creating timeless, modern, and effortless wool pieces that speak to the sensibility and sophistication of women on the land. After having her 4 children, Bridget learnt how important clothing and fashion can make you feel after your body and identity changes. Bridget found a gap in the merino activewear market, as many of the other pieces already on the market were either very technical or pretty plain, which is not what her pieces are about. They are effortless and modern athleisure pieces that can be taken from day to night, task to task, as is the busy life of multitasker rural women. Bridget has given the absolutely fabulous listeners and the Ultimate Farm Wife listeners a 40% discount code. Thank you so much, Bridget. That code is KATJA40, so KATJA, KATJA 40, and that expires on the 31st of October 2025. So log on to the website, which is in the show notes below, and get yourself some Homestead Road pieces that will be part of your wardrobe for years to come using the discount code.
So with 2 kids and usually two off-farm jobs and livestock and pets and all of that kind of stuff, what does a typical day where no emergencies happen? What does a typical day look like on the farm for your family?
This is the part where the remote work comes in tremendously handy. And our kids have started riding the bus to school this year, which is really nice. We live about 7 miles from the kids' school, which is 13 kilometers? Is that roughly?
Yeah, give or take. Yeah.
So this year our kids have started riding the bus, which has been incredible because they leave the house at the same time every morning and they leave almost an hour before my husband has to for work, which has been really nice to not be trying to get all 3 of them out the door at the same time.
Because it used to be that he was driving them to daycare when he was going to his job. Yeah.
So they're not attending daycare anymore, which has been a bit of an adjustment because they're home about 2 hours earlier than they were last year. But they're also home at the same time every day, which is kind of nice. Because previously, my husband would pick them up, but if he stopped to deliver feed somewhere on the way home, or if, God forbid, he, stopped at the neighbor's for 5 minutes and it was there for an hour and change, and by the time he gets home, they're late and the kids are pissed because they've been, playing with barn cats for an hour, where the barn cats are really only fun for about 40 minutes. So they leave in the morning, and then either Jim does chores or I do chores. It's usually pretty quick in the morning. And then he leaves, and I work or look for work or what have you. And the nice part about working from home is that I can run out during the day if there's, lambs or calves or anything explodes or what have you. Usually throw some laundry in because I'm home to do it, which is nice. And then everybody gets home, homework, texting Arlene about how the hell I get my kids to do their homework, as I did last night. Supper, chores, bed, rinse and repeat. Hopefully showers or baths at some point to get the worst of the scuzz off.
So with 2 off-farm jobs, is most field work or cropping type stuff happening on weekends? Is your father-in-law or mother-in-law, are either of them still active in terms of their participation on the farm when it comes to either chores or crop work? Or do you have outside contractors?
My father-in-law still helps with some crop work. His eyesight is not great, which is getting a little scary sometimes with him doing crop work. We do livestock work in the evening, on the weekend, in the morning, whenever we can. Sometimes we'll hire somebody to come help, but it's a pretty piecemeal thing. This is the problem with being older parents. It has a lot of real upsides, but a lot of our friends have kids who are high school age and are helpful, and our kids are young elementary and less helpful for things like driving tractor.
Right. Enthusiastic, but not helpful.
Yeah, it is nice that they're getting to an age where they can be left in the house for half an hour and you know that all they're going to do is eat snacks and play Minecraft, which is maybe not always ideal, but
It's safe.
they're safe and they're happy.
Yeah, that's right. So another question that Katja has for you to answer, and I'm intrigued. How have you handled money and decision making on a family run farm?
Oh, gotcha. It's too bad you're not here for this one. Our farm is held in a family LLC, which means that,
Which means it's incorporated, right?
yes, it's incorporated. We are a big corporate farm now, which cracks me up because Americans do talk about company farms and all this. Like, everyone I know has their farm incorporated because it keeps your farm from destroying your family or vice versa financially. It means that our farm is a separate entity and is not part of our family per se, because in America we've decided that businesses count as people. That does mean that if your business is not incorporated and somebody sues it for something, you can lose your house and, everything else you own, which is terrifying. But it also means that when we got married and decided to incorporate the farm, I was not added as a member of that corporation because there were some folks who were concerned that I was marrying him for the money, which, in my defense, if I wanted to be a gold digger, I feel like I could have done better than someone with 300 acres in Northeast Iowa. The farm is only worth something if you sell it, and we're not near big enough to make enough money to actually be like making money. So, it's it would be a strange choice to marry for money, to marry a small farmer. But that means that I am technically not part of the decision making, but realistically I am. But it also means that the having the dynamics of a family involved in a business is tough at the best of times. I think that's a fair way to put it. We talk a lot on our show about people who say, well, we never needed therapy. And my in-laws are great people, and they're really pretty well adjusted.
And not podcast listeners, for the record.
Not podcast listeners. but you learn a lot about other people's generational trauma real fast when you go into business with them.
So if we're talking about succession and ownership conversations into the future, what you're saying is even at this point, years after getting married and presumably being deemed to not be a gold digger anymore, you are still not a shareholder in that company, or has that changed since then?
I am not. We need to change it, but at this point we'd have to like hire a lawyer and
That costs money.
yeah, it costs money.
Yeah.
My husband, I think, is about a 50% owner in the farm at this point.
And then are your in-laws each 25? Or you don't even know?
I think my mother-in-law has like 2% more than my father-in-law because it is her family farm. The way the LLC is written, I have tenancy rights, so even if my husband dies, the family can't kick me out of the house, which is nice. It also means my kids can't kick me out of the house in my dotage, although realistically, this house is already too big. We moved into the big house and my in-laws moved into a smaller house on the same property because it's a big house and there's no point in one or two people living in it. Realistically, though, I've put a fair amount of money into the farm and into the house, and our house is part of the LLC. So legally at this point, I have gifted that money to my husband. But realistically, I think we better just hope we don't get divorced.
I think that in summary, it's complicated. And I mean, lots of family farms are, right? So yeah, I get that. Yeah, what is on paper and what is in practice are sometimes different things.
Well, and it brings out things like I am very much a plan for the worst and hope for the best kind of a person. And that can look very cold hearted and calculated to people who don't operate that way.
Right. Or don't want to have the conversations that you actually would like to have some clarification on.
Because they say, well, just don't get divorced. I'm like, well, cool. I doubt that most people start out expecting to get divorced. Hopefully, you're not getting married if you expect that you will get divorced or that someone will die. Or
And I would imagine, especially in a situation where the farm is not a money-making venture, if you are investing your earnings into a location that you do not on paper have ownership in, then that comes with risk to you, right? It's not a risk to the other shareholders necessarily because you are investing in their corporation. But if you don't have assurances about what that could mean in the future, then you're investing your private earnings into a company, and you're benefiting from it, but yeah, not necessarily in the long term.
honestly, I have tried very hard to keep my investments to things that do benefit me. Like most of the things I have paid for have been house improvements. So, because our housing is part of our payment for working on the farm through the LLC, things like painting the house so it doesn't disintegrate, because that's what you have to do with wood houses, to me is basically the same as paying a mortgage on the house. So it does benefit the company, but it also directly benefits me. And also, at some point, if you don't want your house to fall down, somebody has to pay for it. So, you know,
So on the same topic, what advice would you give someone who is joining into a farm enterprise that involves in-laws, be that siblings, parents, other humans who have potential ownership and decision-making capacity in the business?
it is better to involve lawyers and mediators and overplan things than it is to have to make decisions when you have to make decisions. And it is always, always, always better to get these things out before you're at a funeral lunch. Because we know a lot of people who've been real surprised when the wills get read. And That's not fair to anybody. One nice thing about our farm is that it's been sold every generation, so we are purchasing it, share by share through the LLC rather than having to go to the bank. But it does resolve a fair amount of you left the farm to them, or it got split between too many people and now nobody can farm it because nobody can afford to buy the other people out. Basically over prepare and overthink, and if people get real ugly about personal shit, deeply, deeply consider about whether you want to be in business with them before you are legally tied to them. Because it's a hell of a lot easier to buy a new farm before all hell breaks loose than it is afterwards.
So, on that note, what kind of boundaries did you have at the beginning, or have you kind of developed over time when it comes to discussions around business, family, marriage, parenthood, those types of relationships that on a farm can often be intertwined?
I don't know that we really have any. My in laws are generally very good about respecting those boundaries.
But you say you don't have any. But your in-laws respect them. So what do you think, even if they haven't been said, what boundaries do you think exist that maybe have just happened naturally?
I have the feeling that my mother in law is probably restraining her input about my wifiness and my parenting. My husband is very much the baby of his family. He has one older sister. But I know that I am not always as doting towards her son as she thinks is appropriate, but I feel like that's kind of her job and not my job.
He's probably been adored enough.
Yeah, yeah, he's a grown up.
What about around the house? You know, you're living in a house that they used to live in, right? Have there been any conversations, or have there been had to be any boundaries around who can walk in or make comments on changes you might make or things like that?
My father-in-law still occasionally will just walk in. He has walked in on me in a towel before, which I think was more uncomfortable for him than it was for me because I was in my own house. I will say the one, and I don't think it was at all that she didn't approve. I think it was just kind of a surprise is that my mother-in-law is a very like earth tones, naturals sort of a person, which is great. Like I like that style. It's just not my style. And so one of the first things I did when we moved in is that I painted all of the kitchen cupboards, which were already painted. I did not paint bare woodwork, painted them turquoise blue. And my mother in law came in and saw that. She goes, "Well, that's different." Which I don't know if the word different means the same sort of thing everywhere as it does here, but it's it's not a compliment.
It's a very restrained way of saying it was a choice that she wouldn't have made. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been 12 years, and I think overall she's pretty happy with the job I'm doing with the grandkids and the farm and everything. And I feel like if turquoise blue kitchen cabinets are the most offensive thing I've done, I'm doing pretty good. We did have the house painted last summer. I think she was a little unsure about it, but it is not turquoise. But she did admit that she was really, really impressed with how it looks now. So I'm real glad that I don't want to say won, but was approved of because it's a real big space and painting a house is real expensive. So there was no second chance.
Yeah, that's right. You're not making any changes there. So, how do you keep your partner relationship, your marriage relationship strong during stressful seasons, be that farming seasons, life seasons, parenting seasons?
It's really, really tough. And one of my biggest things we talk about in therapy is feeling like I'm not being listened to. And when you're in a place where a lot of times your own wants and needs can't be the top priority. And understanding that logically versus not still feeling unhappy about it is a big thing. And especially when it's also a business decision. I go to therapy. I go to a lot of therapy.
And couples therapy as well?
Yeah, I wish. I kind of don't wish though. I feel like at this point it doesn't sound ideal by any means, but I feel like this in this season of our lives, I'm just trying not to stir up the mud that settled to the bottom of the trough. Like, there's gonna probably come a day when we're gonna need to, like, stir up some of that shit and filter it out. But today is not that day.
That's an interesting mental picture, but I understand what you're saying.
Sometimes there's just shit that's not gonna get resolved because we're different people and we're in business with two more people, and there's family and there's community and there's kids and there's
Yeah. And yeah, there's two other people living in your house that you're trying to raise, and yeah.
sometimes you just let stuff filter through, and the big stuff kind of gets stuck in that first screen, and that you actually have to deal with. But if it's small enough shit that it settles to the bottom, maybe we just leave it on the bottom for right now. Like, and that's not saying, we'll just ignore this forever, but maybe for today, that's good enough.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that is one way to make things work in the day to day, right? Is to not take issue with everything, and that doesn't mean that you're ignoring it. It just means that you're okay with not dealing with everything and in the moment. When we talk about seasons that are difficult, one thing we've talked a lot about on our podcast, and if people want to come listen, that would be great. But I know that not everyone is going to go through 4 seasons of our podcast. So I wonder if you're willing to talk a little bit about the season that was your journey to having kids and the fertility journey that you and your husband were on.
What an interesting idea of a season. I don't know what sex ed is like in the rest of the world, obviously, but in America, at least in the Midwest, in the mid 90s, it was very, if you look at a boy, you will get pregnant. You will probably also get an STD, but you will definitely get pregnant. If you think about boys, you will get pregnant, you'll probably get 2 STDs. Sex ed is very much about how easy it is to get pregnant. And so I think when we got married and stopped using birth control, I assumed we'd probably be pregnant in like.
Well, I mean, you got married real quick, so why why with the next step, not just happen immediately?
Everybody thought I was pregnant anyway. So I just assumed it would be easy. And then it wasn't. We were thankfully able to go see a fertility specialist pretty quickly because I was tracking my cycles, and it was very clear that my cycles were not what they should be for ultimate baby making efficiency, shall we say. So it took 42 cycles to have our daughter over just over 3 years. So I generally tell people it was almost 4 years because the whole process was almost 4 years. And 42 cycles is almost 4 years in any normal people world. We did medication, we did IUI, which is basically AI for humans. We gave up. We were told from the beginning that donor egg IVF was our best choice. In the US, that's about $25,000 a cycle, no guarantees. And, we got a lot of doctors saying, well, just take out a second mortgage. People drain their 401k, the retirement plans. I'm like, cool, well, A, we're farmers, we don't have 401ks. And B, we can't mortgage our farm for something that has no guarantee of working. And also, our closest fertility clinic is 2 hours away. And so we quit all the fertility treatments after, quite a long time. and started classes to adopt a kid out of foster care because private adoption for an infant is also very, very expensive and very difficult. And I found one bottle of medication to support a pregnancy if I happened to get pregnant that had been left over. And I was going to just throw it away, but then I was like, I might as well use it. Like, we already paid for it. It's not going to get me pregnant, but if I happen to get pregnant, it'll help me stay pregnant. And now we have a daughter who's 8. And then, so we waited the 6 months after the first baby, like you do. And we went back to the fertility clinic and they said, well, if you want another baby, you should start trying now, because it might take another 42 cycles. And our son is 16 months younger than our daughter. So obviously, it took 2 cycles. Yeah. And then when I was 7 weeks pregnant with our son, I had a biopsy done because I guess the upside of pregnancy is that the hormones that make it easy for a baby to grow make it easy for anything to grow. And had a skin biopsy done of a thing and got a call while we were at the fertility clinic for the ultrasound to prove that our son was viable, saying that I had melanoma and couldn't do surgery until I was into my second trimester. So there was like 8 weeks of hellishness of not knowing how far advanced it was, being offered abortion as our first best option. I have a lot of feelings about abortion provision, and it was at the same time that our state was trying to pass a 6-week abortion ban, which would have meant that no matter how many doctors consulted, the state would have had final say on what healthcare choices I made. So, if you want to hear more about my thoughts on that, you're going to have to come listen to our show because
Yeah, we won't go into all of those things, but suffice it to say, the journey to becoming a parent was not what you expected. And then obviously parenthood is never what we expect it's going to be, which is a huge theme in our podcast as well, because no matter how prepared you think you are, you're not. So how do you, I mean, this word is impossible. So I know that no one has balance, but how do you try to find some type of synergy, maybe balance, whatever, when it comes to balancing motherhood, farm life, off farm work, being a human in your own right? How does that work for you, or does it?
it's gotten easier now that more of their things they need from me are emotional or things they want rather than literal they cannot feed themselves. They will burn the house down.
Right. And they're not as immediate anymore, right? You know, when an infant wants to be fed, they don't have the capacity to be told, "Give me a minute, give me 30 seconds, I need to pee," whatever, right? Older kids, yes, older kids, older problems, or bigger kids, bigger problems, I think is the phrase a lot of people use. But yeah, the immediacy and the frequency and the type of demands on your life are not the same.
Well, and they're usually more able to relatively clearly communicate what they need, which is nice. There's not as much starting with is your butt wet and going from there. It's you know, you may not get a clear input on what snack they want, but they can usually at least tell you that they want a snack, or something along those lines. So that's a little easier. I think one of the best things I've done, and I keep telling myself that this is good for my children and my family to see as well, is that it's very easy for farm parents to lose any sense of being anything beyond a farm parent. And so doing things like doing this podcast, and I have a knitting group that I go to once a week, letting my family see that they're not the absolute center of my universe is good for everyone. It is, I think my in laws see it to be more challenging than I think they even anticipated because they were very much raised in a generation where that was not a thing, that a mother might prioritize her own things over.
Right. Or it's seen as frivolous or even selfish to do things for yourself and prioritize.
But it makes me a better person and it makes me a better mother. So,
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to say from watching you from the outside, I think the fact that you have had access to reliable quality childcare, which is not the reality for many rural families, it has obviously been a big part of finding some kind of balance, right? Because your town has a childcare center where both your children were able to go and you could safely leave them there every day and that was available to you.
yeah. And honestly, having the income to be able to do that, and having the most of the time to support that going to daycare was not going to ruin my children's lives. Surprise, it didn't. They learned things, they were happy, they were safe. It's not going to kill your kids to go to childcare.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have an off-farm job, I mean, or a farm job, I should say that too. If you are farming full time, it's also okay for your kids to be in childcare, and that is a great choice for many families. But it's not as though you were working a job where you could watch your kids and do your job at the same time. That's just not the reality of how earning a living works for most people. So, Katja has a question here about systems or routines, and I am intrigued. So, what systems or routines help you manage kids, cattle, sheep, chaos? What things do you have in place in your life, Katie? Or do you manage the chaos or just flow with it?
Well, Katja, brave of you to assume that I have anything beyond momentum. What's inertia? That's the word I'm looking for. We go entirely on inertia. One thing that has really helped me, possibly, it helps me mostly emotionally, but that flows down into everything else, is having sort of those mile markers in my week, kind of things that I do for myself, or things like doing our show update at the same time every week, things like that, that especially working remotely, it can get to be a big, fast, tornado-y blur of shit real quick, because nothing ever stops and you do basically the same thing every day and you don't go anywhere and you don't see people. And so things like, I try to have coffee with some friends most Sunday mornings real early. It really does not disrupt much of the family schedule, but it puts sort of like a little marker at the beginning of my week. And then knit night is on Thursdays, so it feels like I can kind of like run a little string from a moment of sanity on Sunday to a moment of sanity on Thursday, and hopefully my string doesn't get too frayed in between there. And honestly, it helps that my son is obsessed with knit night. Like, if I don't go, the kids will go to the calendar and be like, "Mommy, it says knit night. Why are you home?" And they get all freaked out. Like, they get upset about it. My son especially doesn't have any concept of what knit night is. Like, he knows what knitting is. He knows that I go to see my friends. He's pretty sure that there's some like secret excitement that happens, which there is. I mean, we eat fried cheese. It's at a restaurant, so there's fried cheese curds and hard cider. But he knows mommy comes home happier, and that's other than that, we're going for good enough. I'm at that place in my life, and my kids are at that place in their lives and on our farm, that sort of like a B plus average in the world. Like, are things 80% of what they need to be, or maybe like 85% of what they need to be? Cool. Is everyone happy more than they're unhappy? Cool.
Those are good markers to have too. So how do you deal with mom guilt? Because I'm sure that all of us have it at one time or another, or constantly, who knows. What is your coping mechanism for when the mom guilt starts to creep in?
I think doing this podcast and talking to so many parents has been one of the best things for that, because nobody thinks they're doing a good job. Statistically, there is absolutely no way in hell that all of us are doing as bad of a job as we think we are. It's not mathematically possible.
I'm going to push back on that. And I say, I think a lot of us think we're doing okay. None of us think we're doing the best job that we could. I don't think that we're all so down on ourselves that we don't think that we're doing.
That's a totally fair pushback. Let's put it that way. Maybe we all have higher standards than we necessarily should, because if all of us think that this level only counts as okay, maybe that's where the bar really should be. And anything above that is more like extra credit rather than like, maybe we need to grade on a curve here of like, you know, what's good enough, and remembering that social media and social media influencers, like, it's so easy to be like, they're evil, they're not existing to fuck with you, but it is advertising. It is not real. I mean, they are real people, don't get me wrong, they may even actually live like that, but that's not the goal that you should aspire to.
I think one thing, I know that this question isn't for me, but I was thinking about this when I saw it. One thing that has helped me keep this in check is that for the most part, my kids are not comparing me to other parents. I mean, sometimes they are if other kids are getting away with stuff that my kids wouldn't. But if my kids think I'm an okay parent, then that's good enough, because they're actually the only ones that count, right? I'm parenting them. I'm the only mother they've got. This is their only experience of having parents. So, obviously, sometimes I do compare myself to other people, and I can get as caught up in that as the next person. But Katie and I actually met through a podcast called One Bad Mother, and I have the t-shirt, and I wore it one time this summer, and my youngest, who's 10, was like, "Why are you wearing that shirt? Like, you're not a bad mom, you're a good mom." And I was like, "Oh, it's just a joke." But it was like, it was that little moment, like, not that I was asking for it, but it was that moment to be like, okay, if they think I'm doing okay, then that's my threshold, right? Like, who else's opinion really matters? Not many.
I think that's a really good point, because it helps tremendously if you find your own people and then that's who your kids are comparing you to. And listeners of our show know how I feel about comparisons and things. But I feel like maybe it's kind of, you stay in your own barn. You know, I raise beef cattle. If I'm at the fair and I go over to the fancy dairy cattle barn, my cattle don't look like their cattle.
Where I'd be hanging out, yeah. As a dairy farmer mom.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be happy to see Arlene, but I'd be like, look at your tall, bony cows.
Yeah, and you wouldn't bring your cows in and then feel bad about yourself because they don't measure up. Like, they're not the same cows. They're not the same.
Just go back to your barn with your cows. Or go to the other barn, because there's cool people over there too. But just know that those are their cows, and these are your cows, and they're both good cows.
Yeah, and we're not going to feed them the same way. Yeah, they're not going to be raised the same way. And the same thing about farms, right? I'm not going to grow the same crops as someone in Australia. I'm not growing the same things as Katie is in Iowa, but we're both doing a good job where we are, or we're doing the best that we can where we are.
I know, and I know we've talked about it on our show, that even like literally about cows, if you took Arlene's fancy dairy cows and put them where my cows live, they would have emotional breakdowns very quickly. And if you took my beef cattle and put them in Arlene's barn, they'd probably just break out and run away, because that's just not their jam. And people are the same way. You just stay in your barn. Go visit other barns, absolutely, but
Yeah, just for the curiosity factor. Yeah. So that brings us to another question Katja has for us, which we kind of have already alluded to, but why did we start Barnyard Language? the idea came from you. So why did you start? Where'd you get the idea, and why are we doing it?
Because we're awesome. Obviously. When I had my daughter, I felt really, really alone. And there's so many great online parenting resources and so many great podcasts and things. But like the podcast that you and I met through, they're generally aimed towards urban people. And so the Facebook groups were very like, have something door dashed. Your husband can do it on the weekend because he'll be home, and the weekend is for doing fun things. And I was like, screw that. The weekend is for castrating cattle. Like, just logistically, it's so different. And there are cultural things that are so different. I think one of the big things for me was there was a discussion of gun control, which is a very hot topic in the US. And people were saying, well, I would never let my kid go to a home with a gun in it. No matter how it was stored, no matter how many guns it was, no matter anything. And realistically, on farms, guns can mean a very different thing than they do in an urban setting. We own guns because we have to kill things, not for self-protection, not for the myriad other reasons that people say they need guns. But if I told my kid they could never go in a house with a gun in it, they wouldn't be allowed in our house, let alone anybody else's. And just like, not that it's a right or wrong thing, but just it's different. And so I'm part of a women's ag group called the Women Food and Ag Network, and one of their big things is mentorship. And so I've both had a production mentor and been a production mentor for other people for farming. And I approached them and asked if I could get mentorship support for starting some sort of community outreach, and decided on a podcast and worked with a great mentor myself and realized that I needed a co-host because obviously I cannot be trusted to talk for that long, and I never would have gotten anything done. Let's just face it. It's good to know your own strengths. So I was thinking about the people who might be a good combination, because I also didn't want someone who was just going to agree with me about everything, because that's not the podcast I want to listen to either. And Arlene and I knew each other through this Ranch and Farm Mom spinoff from the podcast that we were listening to. And so I approached her about doing it, and she said no a number of times, which is fine. And it was like, I think I only asked her once, but she said no, and then she came back and she said no again, and then she said no again, and then she said yes. I was like, sometimes you just got to work your way around to it, I think.
Yeah. I kept coming up with ideas for guests and ideas for episodes. And then I realized that if I was as excited about the prospect of this podcast existing and giving you ideas for it, that maybe what it meant was that I should actually participate and do some of the heavy lifting too. So how has sharing your story publicly and often personally, I mean, some of the things you've shared today, not everyone talks about, how has that impacted your life? Has it impacted your business? Has it affected, different parts of, how you view other people? What has been the lasting impact of being a podcaster?
I honestly don't have the self-control to keep anything to myself. I just don't.
It's not just on the podcast.
No. Like, I'm usually pretty decent at remembering secrets because I forget all about them. But when I was going through infertility and going through that, and people kept asking, and I was finally just like, if you're rude enough to ask about my uterus, I will be rude enough to tell you about my uterus. And hearing how many women had had problems with infertility, had had repeat miscarriages, had not just gotten pregnant the first week and had as many healthy babies as they wanted, and realizing that so much of this, it's not that it's uncommon, it's just that we don't talk about it. And especially from our show, with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, fertility problems, all of that. When I was first diagnosed with postpartum depression, I knew at least one other person who'd had it, but like that was the extent of my knowledge. My knowledge was pretty much baby blues are normal, and if you get anything worse than the baby blues, you're fairly likely to kill yourself. Like, that's what I knew about from American news and mothering topics, whatever. And the more we talk to people, the number of people we talk to who are medicated for postpartum depression and have said that it has saved their lives or it has made them so much more capable or whatever, that these things are so common, but people assume that they're abnormal because nobody talks about it. And giving people the space to talk about the hard things and the good things is incredible. And yeah, I don't remember what the question was. I already forgot it.
That's all right. You answered it.
Good. Go me.
All right, a couple of wrap-up questions. How can farm wives, because this is the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast, how can farm wives feel more confident in their role on and off the farm?
Deodorant. I'm gonna sorry, Arlene. Not sorry, actually. I feel like that's a valid answer. We were talking about this earlier this week, actually, in a podcast, is reminding yourself that someone asked you to be there. Whether it's your family farm and someone is trusting you with it, or you're at your job, or you married into a family farm, they knew what they were getting, and you were what they wanted. And you need to be what you wanted. And then, assuming that you didn't somehow trick them totally and like catfish them and they just haven't noticed, fuck them if they don't like it now. They asked, you provided.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's true.
It's not really going to fit on a t-shirt.
No, but even like you're right. Even if it was a marriage proposal and the farmer asked you to marry him and brought you to the farm and you didn't know what you were doing, they knew and you knew who you were, and you don't have to be somebody else. And being the ultimate farm wife doesn't mean that you have to be in the barn, in the fields, on the tractor. You just have to be who you are. And as long as you and your partner, presumably, are good with your contributions to the relationship and to the business, then that's okay. And that's being the ultimate person of yourself. Because the ultimate farm wife is not necessarily someone who's doing everything in the barn if that's not her, what she's best at, and what her role is supposed to be in life.
And I think one thing I've really struggled with is that you can change. And if it's not who you are right now, people need to accept that. I had an incredibly hard time, when I had our daughter, and I think it's something we hear pretty frequently, is that people really struggle with, if they've been an active part of the farm operation and now there's a baby and they're in the house. That can be a real struggle. It doesn't make you any less of a farmer, but sometimes this is just who you are now, and people need to deal with that too.
Yeah, and in my situation, I was not active on the farm. I was working in the city, I was commuting, and then I had a baby, and then I was at home, and I was like, I don't necessarily want to be in the barn because that was not my role. But now I've got this baby, and I don't know what to what to do with my days, and even that reality of becoming a mother for the first time. That's a big old life shift that we talk about all the time on our show. So we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, because you can listen to Barnyard Language anytime you like. You know where to get fine podcasts. Last question, Katie, from our good friend Katja, and thank you, Katja, for the opportunity to host your show today, and to Katie for coming on and being a guest. So I feel like this is kind of a similar question, but I'm guessing you're going to come up with a different answer than the last one. What do you wish more women in agriculture knew about themselves?
This is a really good question. I think it's always really important to have the reminder that if you don't know something, it's not because of your chromosomes. It's not because you have boobs. It's not because your feet are smaller. It has nothing to do with your gender. It's because you just haven't learned it yet. And to hell with anyone who thinks that it's actually because you're a girl. And also, you should know where to find good work boots and good work pants. And you should really consider if steel toe boots will make your life better, because for many purposes, they will. That's all I got. And also good deodorant, because I'm standing by that one.
There you go. Yeah, she went both ways. She got real deep and then went a practical solution too. All right, so in summary, come join us on Barnyard Language. Thank you, Katja, for letting us share in your platform today, and best wishes from us here in Canada and the good old USA.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Ultimate Farm Wife. If today's chat has made you smile, nod, or feel a little bit more seen in this wild rural life of ours, share it with a mate, hit the follow button, and leave a 5-star review where you watch or listen to this podcast. It's the best way to keep growing this community and showing your support for the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast. A big thank you to the crew behind the scenes who are helping keep this show on the rails. To our show editor, Krista DePathra at the Rural Podcasting Network, and Lou and her team at the Administration Agency, and of course to yourselves who tune in every week. Until next time, keep your hearts full, your boots dusty, and your sense of humour close. Enjoying The Ultimate Farm Wife? You might also love this podcast by Caite and Arlene, Barnyard Language.
The Barnyard Language Podcast is honest talk about running farms and raising families, hosted by us, Caite and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
We talk to guests who have life experience that's relatable to parents in agriculture and offer resources, perspective, compassion, a few swears, and lots of laughs.
Whether your farm is a raised bed in your backyard or 10,000 acres.
Whether your family is in the planning stages or you've got a dozen kids.
If you've ever had a car seat in a combine, a stroller in a stable, or you have a toddler or a teen in your tractor, this is the podcast for you.
Subscribe to Barnyard Language today on your favorite podcast platform.
Before you go, if you've been loving these farm life chats, I'd love for you to join me over on my other podcast too. It's called Absolutely Fabulous, where we dive into agriculture beyond the headlines and bridging the urban-rural divide. We'll deep dive into big conversations in ag, from the challenges to the highlights and what's shaping our future. It's a space where honest stories, laughter, and a good dose of farm life real talk goes on. So make sure to head to the link in the show notes, subscribe to the Absolutely Fabulous, and I'll play the intro for you now.
Hi, welcome to Absolutely Fabulous. My name is Gillian Fennell, also known as Station Mum 101. I love everything about agriculture, especially the people, and especially communicating about what makes Australian ag so special.
And I'm Katja Williams, a beef, cattle and cropping farmer, and I love all things ag, and I'm also known as the Ultimate Farm Wife. Together, we are Absolutely Fabulous, and we are talking all things agriculture beyond the headlines.
And we can't wait to give our opinion to you, and we hope you enjoy it.